An old man is dying in a hut made of grass and bone, and the entire library of a nation is dying with him, not a metaphor. He is the only person left who knows which of the two nearly identical roots stops a child's fever and which one stops a child's heart. He is the only one who remembers where the water sits in the third year of a drought, because the last third-year drought was in his boyhood, 41 years ago, and nobody younger has ever seen the riverbed go white. When his breathing stops, the cure and the water both vanish. There is no shelf to check. There is no backup. Every single thing that human beings knew for something like 200,000 years before the first scratched clay lived inside skulls that rot. Songs, knots, poison recipes, star maps, ancestor names. That is what we are getting into. Start with the size of the problem, because we consistently underestimate it. A functioning forager band is not living off vibes and berries. Among the Ache of eastern Paraguay, anthropologist Kim Hill and his colleagues documented adult men who could name and describe the behavior of dozens of prey species, plus the seasonality of each, plus the tracking cues. Among the Hadza of Tanzania, researchers have recorded well over 100 plants in active use. In the Amazon, one plant might be food, another almost identical plant is a fish poison, and telling them apart is a skill nobody is born with. Hill's work on Ache hunters found something that should have been embarrassing for the athletic theory of hunting. Peak hunting return rates arrive in the late 30s and 40s, not in the 20s, when the body is at its physical best. The strongest body in the band is not the most productive one, which means what a hunter is actually carrying is not muscle. It is a database, and a database with no hard copy has exactly one strategy available to it: make the human brain store things it wasn't designed to store, by cheating. So they cheated with rhythm. Here is the ugly truth about memory. Nobody can reliably recall a flat list of 200 facts, but almost everybody can recall a song they hated in 2009. Metre, rhyme, and melody act as error correction. If a line has to scan, a wrong word breaks the line, and the wrong word gets audibly rejected by the group. This is not speculation. Milman Parry went to Yugoslavia in the 1930s and recorded illiterate singers, the Guslers, performing epics of thousands of lines, and he showed the poems were built from formulaic phrases fitted to meter, which is how the length becomes possible at all. Albert Lord published the analysis in 1960 as The Singer of Tales. The Rig Veda was transmitted orally in India for centuries before it was written, with recitation schools using pitch and syllable drills so obsessive that reciters learned versions of the text backwards as a checksum. Backwards? Imagine proving you know a phone contract by reciting it in reverse. That is what a civilization does when the only hard drive available is a nephew. Rhythm gets you the long stuff. It does not solve the problem of where you keep the map. And this is where oral cultures did something genuinely strange with the ground itself. They stopped storing information in their heads and started storing it in the landscape. The Aboriginal songlines of Australia are the most studied case. Routes across country where each feature, each waterhole, each rock is fixed in a sequence of sung verses, so the song and the walking are the same act. You are not remembering a map. You are remembering a tune, and the tune is the map. In 2016, linguist Nicholas Reed and geographer Patrick Nunn published a survey of Aboriginal oral traditions describing coastal flooding along 21 separate stretches of the Australian coastline and matched them against known sea level rise at the end of the last glacial period. Their argument is that these accounts describe real inundations that ended roughly 7,000 years ago. That is a contested reading, and Nunn says so himself, since you cannot carbon date a story. But if it holds even partly, it means a spoken account survived 300 generations of mouths without a single written word. Your family cannot agree on what happened at a wedding in 2011. There is a catch nobody mentions about landscape memory, and it is brutal. Move the people off the land, and the archive stops working. Because the storage medium was the country, break the walking route with a fence, a mine, a mission station, and the verses lose their anchors. This is one of the most underappreciated mechanics of colonization. You do not need to burn a library if the library is a path, and you build a road across it. The Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies has recorded around 250 languages spoken on the continent at contact in 1788, and by the 2021 census, only a dozen or so were still being learned by children as a first language. Every one of those languages carried a taxonomy, names for animals, weather patterns, edible tubers, the specific hour a fruit ripens. When the language goes, the taxonomy is not translated. It is deleted because there was never a word list to translate from. Linguists estimate that a language dies somewhere on Earth roughly every 2 weeks. Most of them take their pharmacology with them. And there is the thing that makes an elder's death mathematically different from anyone else's. A young person's knowledge is redundant. 20 people in the band know how to set that snare. An 80-year-old's knowledge is often held by one person because it deals in events that only recur once every few decades. The drought of the century, the year the caribou changed route, the fever that came through and what stopped it. Ethnographers working with the Inuit and with Australian desert groups have repeatedly recorded exactly this asymmetry. The rare event knowledge is concentrated in the oldest heads. Kristen Hawkes and colleagues built the grandmother hypothesis around a related observation among the Hadza, where post-menopausal women were bringing in serious calories and provisioning grandchildren, which helps explain why human females live decades past fertility at all. Chimpanzees essentially do not. It is a leading interpretation, still argued over, but the survival logic is clean. A grandmother is a redundant food source and a non-redundant memory bank. Kill her and you lose next century's drought plan. This is why the death of an old person in a small society is not sad in the way we mean sad. It is structural damage. Now, change gear, because there is a second half to this that has nothing to do with grief and everything to do with paranoia. If your entire civilization is stored in aging brains, you develop enforcement. Real, unpleasant enforcement. Initiation systems across Aboriginal Australia, Melanesia, and much of West Africa worked as staged information release. You got a layer of knowledge at one ceremony, a deeper layer years later, and the deepest material sometimes never, depending on who you were. Anthropologists describe restricted knowledge as the norm, not the exception. Pain was part of the delivery. Circumcision, scarification, tooth avulsion, isolation, sleep deprivation, cruel or extremely good engineering, depending on how you look at it, because there is solid psychological work showing that arousal and stress at the moment of encoding strengthen memory for the event. You do not forget the night they knocked your tooth out and told you the origin of the river. Compare it with your own education, where you were told a fact in a warm room at 9 in the morning and forgot it by lunch. The tooth method has a better retention curve. It also has a side effect nobody planned for. Restrict knowledge to keep it accurate, and you have created something worth killing for. Information becomes property. Elders become gatekeepers, and gatekeeping is power. Ethnographers in Aboriginal Australia and in the Sepik region of Papua New Guinea have documented senior men controlling access to songs, designs, and ritual objects, and that control mapping directly onto authority over marriages, labor, and land. There is a documented practice in parts of Melanesia of songs and ritual sequences being traded between groups, exchanged the way you would exchange pigs or shells, because a sequence has a market value. A rival group learning your secret is not a leak. It is a theft of capital, which puts a very uncomfortable frame around the modern version. You sign a non-disclosure agreement. You call something proprietary. You keep a recipe in the family. Every one of those instincts predates the ability to write the secret down, and it was born in a world where the secret and the elder were the same object, and both could be stolen or lost in one afternoon. There is a cost to relying on old brains that oral cultures apparently knew about, and it is not the one you would guess. It is not that memory fades, it is that memory edits. Human recall is reconstructive. Every retelling reshapes the story slightly toward what makes sense now. Oral traditions handle this with something historians call structural amnesia. The past gets quietly reorganized to justify the present. Jan Vansina, who spent his career on African oral tradition and published Oral Tradition as History in 1985, described genealogies collapsing in the middle. You keep the founding ancestors and you keep the last 3 or 4 generations, and the 200 years of names in between get flattened out because nobody needs them for a land claim. It is not lying. It is compression, running automatically with nobody noticing. The written record's whole superpower is that it cannot do this. A clay tablet from Uruk does not helpfully update itself when the political situation changes. A grandfather does every single time he speaks, and he is completely sincere about it, which raises the question of what happened when writing finally arrived. The people who lived through it did not celebrate. Plato wrote it down in the Phaedrus, around the 370s BCE, and put the complaint in the mouth of an Egyptian king. Writing will produce forgetfulness in the learner's soul because people will trust external marks instead of remembering from within. Julius Caesar, describing the Gaulish Druids in his account of the Gallic Wars in the 50s BCE, reported that they refused to commit their doctrine to writing even though they used Greek letters for other business. Partly so, students would not slack off on memorizing, partly to keep the material restricted. Both sources have their agendas, and Caesar is describing enemies he was busy conquering, so read him carefully. But the pattern is consistent. The first response to the invention of the backup drive was not relief. It was contempt. They understood something we lost. Memorizing is not the same as having access. One of them shapes you. The other one just sits there in your pocket, extremely well organized, being touched by nobody. And here we are, holding a device that contains more information than every elder who ever lived, and unable to recall a single phone number. The strangest part of this whole story is the arithmetic, and it is very simple. In a band of 30 people, the deep time knowledge, the rare event stuff, might live in 3 or 4 heads. Statistically, over a bad decade, an epidemic, a raid, a famine, you can lose all 4. Anthropologists studying the Tasmanian record have argued something close to this happened at scale. When rising seas cut Tasmania off from mainland Australia around 10 to 12,000 years ago, the population, thought to be a few thousand people, appears in the archaeological record to lose techniques it once had. Bone tools disappear from the deposits. So do some forms of fishing. Joseph Henrich has used it as a case study for the idea that a population below a certain size cannot maintain complex skills, because each skill needs enough expert teachers to survive random death. Other archaeologists dispute the reading and argue for deliberate cultural choice rather than loss. Either way, the mechanism is real and it is chilling. A technology can go extinct, not because anyone forgets it, but because the last 2 people who were good at it died in the same winter, before the apprentices were fluent. So the fever root goes into the ground with the old man, and nobody in the band knows it is gone, because you cannot notice the absence of something you were never told existed. That is the shape of every oral culture's ending. Not a fire, not a conquest. Just a quiet subtraction that leaves no gap you can point at. We built writing to stop that happening, and it worked, and the price was that we no longer carry anything inside us that would die with us. Your grandmother knows how to do something with her hands that has no name and no manual, and when she goes, it goes. And the fact that you can look up almost anything else will not help you at all. Somewhere in Australia, there is a waterhole that a song used to find. The song is still partly there. Nobody left alive can walk it.